right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at. Welcome you to another Altera webinar today. We're doing something a little bit different this time. You know, if you've attended an Altera webinar in the past, you know, we usually get pretty technically deep on stuff. But that said, we wanted to try something a little bit different and do something more of a soft skills approach. You know, if you've been watching the IT industry for a little while, soft skills has been something of a, a major topic point lately, with good reason. I mean, things like certification are very important to our industry and things like that. So today we're bringing you a webinar all about certification and how to fast track your IT career with VMware certifications. So my name is Andy Syrewicze. I'm a technical evangelist here at Altera Software, and I've got a good buddy of mine, Luke Orellana, on the line to talk us through the content today. How's it going, Luke?
Good. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. It's an interesting topic. I mean, if you're in IT, certification is just a way of life, right, Luke?
Oh, yeah. Yep. It's part of the job.
Yeah, definitely. So we got a lot of content to get through. So I say let's get right into it here. I want to go ahead and share my webcam. So my webcam mount for the top of my monitor decided to break this morning. So I've got this, you know, nice side view going on. So hopefully it's my good side and not the bad side, you know. So anyway, you know, there's going to be lots of self-deprecating humor on this call, I'm sure. So just get ready for it, right? Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about our agenda for the day. So first off, we're going to talk about introductions for the day. We're going to get into what the barriers and struggles of certification are. We're going to talk about the various certification tracks that are under the, you know, VMware umbrella. You know, one quick note about that. So as you know, we're doing a VCP certification course and exam giveaway. Now, all of you that have logged into the webinar today, you're all eligible to win that giveaway. And with that in mind, understanding the certification tracks, that whole section, we're going to cover the full gamut of VMware certifications, what the different tracks look like, that type of thing. But for the remainder of the webinar today, we're going to primarily focus on the VCP itself, just because that's kind of the, I don't want to say entry-level VMware certification, but probably the one that most people are interested in. So I'll get into that a little bit more later, but wanted to mention that here up front. And then what we'll do from there is we're going to get into some training and exam costs, because obviously there's a monetary component to certification, right? And then we're going to get into learning materials and resources, strategies for lab setup, so you can actually train and practice for your exam. And then we'll get into our wrap up and Q&A. And in that section, we'll have more information on the giveaway as well. Again, like I said, just by being here, you're all eligible for that. And we'll be doing the drawing tomorrow sometime to decide, you know, who the winner is. So from there, let's get into some introductions. Again, my name is Andy Syrewicze. I'm a technical evangelist here at Altera Software. I'm also a Microsoft MVP and a VMware vExpert. And I've been in the industry for, it's hard to believe, you know, 17, 18 years now. Historically, I've always been focused on the Windows Server Stack and VMware with an emphasis on Hyper-V and vSphere technology. So virtualization and infrastructure guy, basically. So with that, you know, I've also been working on cloud and containerization technologies, because that's kind of, you know, the way of the future, right? And we're all kind of making that transition as well. If you have any questions after the webinar, if you just want to reach out and say, hey, then go ahead and reach out to me on Twitter at @Syrewicze, and I'm also quite active on all of the Altera blogs, altera.com/hyper-v/VMware and /MSP-dojo. And Luke, I'll hand it over to you so you can introduce yourself.
Hey, everyone. My name's Luke Orellana. I'm a VMware vExpert. Technologies that I work with, mainly the Windows stack on VMware. Lately, for 2019, I've been doing a lot of infrastructure as code work with Terraform and Packer on both on-prem VMware and Azure. Certifications I've done in the past is I've got my VCP 5, my VCP 6. The last 6 months, I've gotten my Azure Administrator, and then I went and got my Azure DevOps Expert. Since I've been doing so much infrastructure as code work, figured I'd pick those ones up as well. So if you're interested in anything infrastructure as code for VMware, be sure to check out my blogs. There's my Twitter handle as well too. So.
Yeah, those are some pretty good blog posts. Those are out on the VMware blog, if I remember correctly. So definitely worth checking those out. And Luke, I got to say, you're making me look bad with all these certifications you've gotten here recently. I mean, what the heck, man?
Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed.
No, well, that's great. Certifications are like we've mentioned so far, a great thing to have. So, real quick word about the sponsor of today's webinar. Again, Altera Software, the company I work for. We're a fast-growing developer of some pretty fantastic, super easy to use backup software that's designed for MSPs, IT resellers, and IT departments. Virtual backup solution is trusted by 50,000 plus customers, 10,000 plus partners, and 2,000 plus MSPs worldwide. And that product stack is Altera VM Backup and Altera Office 365 Backup. If you're interested in any of those products or the MSP program specifically, all of the relevant links are right there for you. And let's move on to barriers and struggles of certification. That title makes it sound quite epic now that I'm reading through it, right? But realistically, there are barriers and struggles to certification. And to kind of kick things off, I wanted to start with a poll. So what are your main barriers to certification? So go ahead and distribute that poll to folks. Go ahead and fill it out. Let us know what your barriers to certification are. And while that poll's going on, Luke and I can talk a little bit about our own barriers to certification. And Luke, I guess we'll go ahead and start with you. Historically, what's been some of the barriers to achieving certification that you've run into in your career?
Big thing for me is I think I'm not ready enough to take the exam, and so I just push it off. And then eventually a year goes by and I haven't taken the exam yet. So what I try to do there is schedule the exam, set a date, and then I'm forced to study for it and I'm forced to take it. So that's my biggest barrier. The other is time. If I get distracted doing other things, life gets in the way, then that stuff kind of gets pushed aside. So yeah, those two for me.
Very much so. Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely. Time is kind of the big deal because, you start targeting a certification, you start working on it, like you said, life happens, right? I mean, I look at myself personally, wife, kid, dog, travel quite frequently to conferences for work purposes. I mean, where do you fit it in, right? And I mean, certification study is one of those things that it's not like you can just sit down and do it for 15 minutes, right? I mean, you have to really sit down and drill into it for a couple of hours. And to really do it justice, you have to get hands-on with the technology you're trying to cert in too, right? Which means I have to set up a lab, I have to, do all these different things, which, is time consuming in and of itself. So with that, looks like we've had the poll up for 2 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and close that out. And just like I suspected, cost is the big heavy hitter. Big. By 77% said cost is the major barrier. And that's interesting because we have a slide specifically on this when it comes to the VCP certification specifically. So definitely we're going to talk a lot more about that. Thankfully, I've always been fortunate enough to have a company backing me for certification, which usually comes with, there's usually caveats and stipulations to that, right? You've probably run into that as well, right, Luke?
Yep. I've had it where if you leave the company within a year of them paying for the exam, then you have to owe that money back. There's always little stipulations. Or if you fail the exam, then they won't pay for it. They only pay for the one that you pass.
Right.
But, I mean, it's still a useful perk. So that's how I've had most of my certifications paid for, is by companies that I've worked for.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm kind of looking through the questions form. We've had a couple people kind of chime in, and by all means, if you had feedback on, what your barriers to certification are outside of, if you want to say more than just answer the poll, by all means, let us know in the questions form. But, it looks like the big thing is lack of time to take away from actual work, which that's a big one too. A lot of organizations, they want you to be in the trenches doing the work, fighting the fires every day. That's a big one. And then another one about time here, having to shift priorities around. time limits. Yeah, it's just I keep seeing time over and over and over again, and yeah, definitely, definitely. I feel your pain. I feel your pain. So, all right. Well, with that, again, we got a lot of content to cover, so let's get into the next section here, and that is understanding the certification tracks. So, like I mentioned in the, kind of the introduction section, we are going to be focusing primarily on the VCP certification because, again, that's often deemed the entry level certification for VMware professionals. And I put entry level in quotation marks because from a technical perspective, if you're looking to start down the VMware certification track, I say it's the first certification that you have to achieve. And like I said, I put it in quotations because even though it's like the first technical certification to go through, it by no means feels like an entry level certification. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Luke, but I found it to be one of the more difficult certifications to achieve over the years.
Yeah, it is pretty in depth. I mean, there's 2 exams you have to take. The first one is pretty easy. The second is where all the meat and potatoes are for the studying. I mean, you have to go through a lot of different components of vSphere. So yeah, that's definitely the hardest one for sure.
So I mean that's why I put it in entry level in quotations, because while it isn't from a difficulty perspective, right?
Yep.
And we'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide here when I start looking at the certification tracks. And really what this is designed to do, the VCP is designed to create a baseline level of knowledge prior to hitting the different branches, the specializations that are in VMware certification tree. Now there is what's called the VCA certification, VMware Certified Associate, that sits underneath, but there's no requirement to have it to work on the VCP. And it's a different audience that I'll talk about here in a second. And then, this is considered to be one of the most sought after virtualization certifications in the market today. It has been for a while. I mean, I even remember when I first started working on the VCP, I think I worked on it back in version 3.5 and version 4. So, I'm something of a gray beard, I guess I would say, when it comes to VCP certification. But I mean, even back then, the process, actually getting the sitting for the exam and passing it, it was quite the endeavor even back then, like it is today. So, well, let's actually look at the certification tree. Now, I do have magnifier standing by. There's a lot going on this slide. Luke, how is that for readability on your end?
It's a lot of information.
A lot of information, yeah. So let me do this. Previous. Let's do this. So we actually get magnifier out here, and that doesn't seem to be working very well, but we'll use it as needed. So starting on the left-hand side, you'll see that we've got several different certification tracks. Starting at the top, we've got data center virtualization. We've got network virtualization underneath that. We've got cloud management and automation, desktop mobility, and digital workspace. So we've got 5 different tracks. And starting from left to right, VCA is on the left, all the way down to the architect level certification, VCDX, on the right-hand side. Now, most folks that are very on-premises and very data center oriented are probably going to be interested in the DCV track, the data center virtualization, the green one at the very top. But there are some different designations here, and we'll talk about the specializations here in the next slide. But as you go through from left to right, everything from let me get rid of magnifier here for a second. Everything from over here on the left, certification tracks, to this gray gain experience column here in the middle. That is all basically VCA. The VMware Certified Associate. Where VCP starts is this gain experience column all the way to the right to the next gray column. So you see the 2 gray columns in the middle. Everything in between is the VCP. So in order to get the VCP, you have to take a course, VMware, vSphere, install, manage, configure, install, config, manage, ICM for short. But basically, it's a course that is actually required. And we're going to talk about that requirement a little bit more in a second. And then after you take that course, like Luke mentioned earlier, you have 2 exams that you have to sit and pass for. First is the foundations exam. The foundations exam is very much what it sounds like. Covers, the base level knowledge that all VMware certified professionals should have. Once you pass that exam, you choose, kind of an elective specialization. Like I mentioned, most people are going to go the green option at the very top, the DCV track, data center virtualization, and from there you have, a different elective exam that you have to take. And once you pass that specialization exam, then you are awarded with your VMware Certified Professional certification in whatever specialization that you chose. The only certification track that's a little bit different is the digital workspace track, which centers around VMware. They acquired a company called Workspace 1, 2, 3 years ago, I think. And that Workspace 1 basically centers around provisioning and deploying applications to endpoints. And that's primarily what that certification track is all about and why it's a little different than the rest. And then once you get past VCP, you've got 2 what I would call more premier level certifications. On the right hand side, you've got VCAP, which is VMware Certified Advanced Professional. And there's different branches, different sub branches even, I guess I would say, based on which specialization you choose. And then at the very right hand side, you've got your VCDX, which is like your architects, your VMware Certified Design Expert. And for that, you have to actually submit and successfully defend a original design. You have to actually present it to other VCDXs. So that can certainly be an arduous and stressful process, having to actually create something and defend your choices, right? So that's the full certification track. Again, we're focusing on what's directly in the middle in between the 2 gray columns for the VCP certification. Anything you want to add there, Luke?
No, that VCDX sounds kind of like the Microsoft Master to me. Remember that cert back in?
Oh yeah, that takes me back. Microsoft Certified Master. That's been a while.
Yep.
No, I don't think that's a thing anymore, unfortunately.
No, they discontinued it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we've got a couple of questions going on here. Which track is the best and most sought after? I don't have any industry data to support that question, but what I would say is, choose the one that's best for you and your organization. Maybe your organization will help you make that determination. Maybe they need somebody that knows the vRealize suite. And with that in mind, then you'll probably want to specialize in the cloud management and automation track. Maybe your organization needs someone with VMware Horizon experience. Then you're going to want to look at the desktop and mobility track. Really, it depends on your own organization, your own situation. If I had to give a blanket answer, I would say probably DCV, the data center virtualization, is probably going to serve you the best from a generalistic point of view to make you really well-rounded. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Luke.
Yeah, I would say that the DCV, that's going to be the most common. I mean, NSX has a price tag to it, so not every company is going to have licensing for NSX. VDI, that also has a price tag. Usually the bread and butter is the DCV. I mean, you can stand up free ESX and host that in your company, so that's going to be the biggest bang for your buck, in my opinion.
Yep, definitely. All right, well, time frame for studies to complete full track. Jonathan just asked that question. What's the time frame to study and complete the full track? That's an interesting point you brought up, because I remember looking at the certification diagram for the first time and looking at the certification timeline at the bottom here. So you see, 2 weeks for VCA, 90 plus days for VCP, 6 months for VCAP, and 18 months for VCDX. Personally, I kind of scratch my head at that's even on there. And the reason why I question that is because everybody learns at a different pace, right? I don't like the idea of like trying to put study time into a specific bubble. I guess it feels like a limitation, but like Luke, to your point earlier, setting your own goal, I think, would be the best option personally.
Yep.
Anyway, we have some questions here about mandatory training, which I'll get to that in a second. We have a slide on that in just a second. And a couple of the other questions here we'll be talking about as we go through. So stay tuned. With that, the next thing I want to talk about is, how do these certification tracks line up with career positions? I kind of talked to this a little bit already, but there's always a question about, okay, which one's most relevant to the role I'm in? And data center virtualization, I would say, is most akin to those people that are currently in system administration positions today, people that are actually working on infrastructure. That's probably what you want to look at. If you're a NetOps engineer, you're working with switches and routers all day long, you probably want to look at the network virtualization route. Cloud administrators, if you are a cloud administrator or you're an aspiring cloud administrator, CMA is probably the route to take a look at, because that focuses all on the vRealize suite of applications that VMware has. I mentioned it earlier, DTM is the desktop and endpoint management. That primarily centers around VMware Horizon View and VDI. So, if you're looking at doing VDI, you're probably going to want to look at DTM. And again, the DW, that focuses on Workspace ONE, which again focuses on provisioning applications to endpoints. That's kind of a newer one there. Again, you're probably going to focus on the one that your organization needs or that you need personally. But the other thing that I neglected to mention, you're not limited to just selecting one of these. If you want to, have a VCP in more than one specialization, you can certainly do that. So if you want to do DCV and CMA, by all means, go for it. So anything to add on your end, Luke?
Yeah, no, you covered all of it. Yeah.
All right. And then the other thing I wanted to do is, how do the various certification levels, how do they stack up with positions within an organization? So I mentioned the VCA a couple of times before, and that's the VMware Certified Associate. And how I mentioned it's kind of a different, it's targeted at a different audience. And this is the reason why you can skip it. The VCA is targeted at people who either know nothing about virtualization, like maybe a junior admin that's just coming into the organization, just starting to work with the technology, or it's angled at sales and marketing people who maybe they have to go sell the solution, or maybe they have to market the solution in some way, shape, or form. That's really what the VCA is all about. If you want to start getting into the technical side of things, that's where the VCP comes in. I know we've been talking about that quite a bit, and I would say that's intended for your mid-level administrators, people who have been in the organization for a little while. They've got quite a bit of responsibilities, and it's a good technical starting point. Your VCAP comes in for your senior administrators, and VCDX, I've mentioned a few times before, comes in for the solution architects. Now from there, let's talk about training and exam costs, because I'm seeing quite a few questions going on here about training and exam costs. And as people mentioned in the poll, the cost is probably the #1 most common issue that people run into when they're trying to achieve a certification. So again, we're focusing on the VMware VCP certification here. What are its specific requirements? And that's what this slide is all about. It's more than just an exam. If you're a first-time VCP, if you've never held the certification before, you must. There's no way out of it. You have to attend a certified training course. And like I said earlier, that comes down to the VMware ICM course, the Install, Config, Manage, and it is not cheap by any sense of the imagination. $4,250. It's expensive, very expensive. So you do have to sit and go through this course. There's no way around it, unfortunately. I mean, you can even go sit for the exam and take it and pass it, and you still have to sit for this exam before you've what's the wording that they use, before you've fulfilled the certification requirements. This is a big rub in the VMware community. You know, if you do a couple of Google searches, it doesn't take a lot of time to find people complaining about this requirement. So definitely that's a big barrier for this certification. Now that said, the course is helpful. It's got a lot of useful information in it, but there's no official thing that says this, but from what I've heard from people who have sat through the course and have taken the certification, and maybe Luke, you have some thoughts on this as well. I've heard that the course really only covers about 60 to 70% of the material that is actually in the exam. Is that kind of what you've run into as well, Luke?
Yep, that's exactly correct. And they actually, at least in my class, the instructor told us that that was the case, that he was only going to cover 60 to 70%. So, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of rub with people too. I mean, you look at that price tag and you kind of, you know, they should be covering everything that's in the exam, right? So, but that's where some of your own self-study and you know, that type of stuff comes into play. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next section. So the other things that you have to do is you have to sit for and pass the foundations exam. You have to choose an elective path, and then you have to take the certification for the elective path. Now, when you signed up for this webinar, you know, I'm sure you saw the $4,500 number all over the place, right? And you're probably looking at this and you're saying, Andy, the numbers that you have listed on the screen don't add up to $4,500. Now, I will admit, math is hard, right? But where the $4,500 comes from, and it wasn't just me struggling to get the numbers right, where the $4,500 comes from, and this is one of the questions that I've seen in the list here, is that quite often, more often than not, I found that you can get the certification training course to include the foundations exam voucher as well. So that $125 amount usually goes away and is just pulled into the $4,250 amount. So, you know, drop in the bucket, but you know, $125 is $125, right? So that's kind of nice. So that's where the $4,500 amount comes from. You know, you might get unlucky and fall into maybe like that, you know, small time period where they're not included for some reason. But more often than not, I found that, like I said, the foundations exam voucher is included in the training course. So from there, you know, I mentioned earlier that, hey, you don't have to look very far to find some people upset about the cost here. You know, I think this was in a single 2-minute Google search right here. I found these 2 comments out there. You know, people are upset about it. You know, the one in the middle there with the 66 number attached to it, this was actually on VMware's blog post about the recertification requirements, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You know, and they said there's no mention of dropping the money grab specific class requirement. Too little, too late. Again, it's a big rub for the community. So with that, you know, what are your alternatives for paying for the course requirements? You know, what are your options? And sadly, there aren't many. You can pay out of pocket, right? Which is not great. You know, most people don't have $4,000-$5,000 just laying around. You can be sponsored by your employer, like Luke and I talked about a little bit earlier, but that comes with its own attachments and caveats and that type of thing. One interesting thing that I've run into in the last couple of years is I've heard and seen a few instances where, like a local community college or a local university, they will have some sort of college course that you can pay for and attend that will often include you know, the requirements for the coursework. Now, you got to read the fine print on those. That's not always the case, but I found that there are some that do that, and it often comes out to be cheaper than the $4,250. but not always. So that's just another place you can look, another thing another option that is potentially viable. But again, you got to look at the fine print. You have to, apply for that college or university, which is a process in and of itself. You got to pay for tuition. So, I mean, you have to look and put all that together to see if it is more cost effective, if it's worth the headache or not. And then I have third-party discount listed as well. There are some third-party training companies out there that will occasionally run discounts for the install, config, manage training. Like I know HP does their own training. There's a couple other, I can't think of the name of the company right now. New Horizons, I think, is a training company that occasionally they will run discounts on the certification course. I don't know, Luke, do you have any thoughts, anything that you've run into outside of what I've got listed here so far?
Yeah, no, that I think that's kind of it. That's unless you win the free voucher in this webinar.
I should have put that as a bullet point, shouldn't I? So,
yeah, you missed out.
That seems like a missed opportunity on my part there. So,
yeah.
Anyway, so let's see. Just looking through the questions here. Somebody says I disappeared. Is my webcam still on, Luke?
Let me see.
Everybody can see my smiling face still, hopefully.
Yeah, you're on there. I can see you.
All right, just making sure, Again, this is my good side, so I want to make sure that, I'm getting the time is worth it, right? So,
yeah.
Anyway. Let's see. Do have a comment here from Bryant. With an active CCNA, you can take the NSX exam and then VCP with no classes. I was not aware of that. That actually seems like a pretty sweet deal. Of course, the CCNA is no walk in the park by itself, but for those that already have a CCNA, that definitely could be a good option.
Awesome. Dang.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, all right. So let's keep going here. Got a lot more material to go through yet. So, this all begs the question of, is it worth it, right? Is the certification worth it? And the short answer is yes. If you want a really detailed breakdown, I actually put a blog post together on this specific question. Is the VCP certification worth the $4,500? The URL to that is right there. Again, for those asking, if you'll get a copy of the slide deck, you will. So, don't feel like you have to quick jot down the URL. But if you want to go look at it, the URL is right there. Otherwise, you can just click on it when you get the slide deck, right? So, to answer the question of is it worth it, the VCP will get you increased job prospects and get you increased pay, gives you the knowledge to reach bigger and better things, higher level titles, more responsibilities. And the other important bit that I wanted to mention on the last slide but forgot is once you have it, you're in the club, right? And what I mean by that is once you've achieved VCP certification once, you don't have to do that course requirement ever again. Now, maybe I shouldn't say ever because maybe they'll change that requirement at some point. But as it stands today, you only have to do that course requirement one time. So I guess that's the silver lining, right? And then the certification requirements have, I say recently, been relaxed. This was back in February, March timeframe of 2019. So the research costs really are negligible. So there used to be a requirement, Luke, you might be able to refresh me on this. I seem to remember the requirement being every 2 years required a research, correct?
Yeah, it was every 2 years.
Yeah, so that requirement has gone away now. And there's no research requirement, but there is the caveat that, hey, if I'm certified in VMware, vSphere version 5, if I'm trying to apply for a job where they're running vSphere 6, which most places probably are, my knowledge is probably dated, at least on paper, right? My knowledge is dated. So, your certification will kind of fall behind as new versions of vSphere come out. So you're going to want to recert just to stay up on what's new, right? So there's kind of, I guess I would say there's a passive recertification requirement there, right? So,
yeah.
And just some supporting information here. There's some salary information there from payscale.com, if I remember correctly. I intended to put the source underneath the picture, but I apparently neglected to do so. But you can see there that the positions that most often have VCP certifications: senior systems engineers, system administrators, and IT managers, and their associated salaries. And the other thing that I found really interesting was TechTarget did an interview with a human services agency out of Connecticut. And this quote is really interesting to me. And it says, right now it's a blank check. If you have it, you can walk into almost any mid-size or large consultancy and say, pay me, simply because the VCP is so hot to market to both potential and current clients. I would say there is some truth to that. I mean, obviously, you're not going to go in there and demand, $500,000 a year or anything like that. But, it definitely is in demand is the point. So, well, from there, let's talk about learning materials and resources. And Luke, I think you're going to take us through this one. So start with exam blueprints.
Yep. Okay. So you just signed up for the VCP DCV exam. Where do you start? I recommend you take a look at the exam blueprints. That will basically give you the details on the exam, how many questions it is, how much time you have to take it, what type of people are applicable for taking the exam. Is this geared towards more of the sales type, or is this more of the expert certification? All that stuff is covered there. There's also the topic areas or the objectives that are covered on the exam, and I will show you that once we get to the demo. I'll go through and show you, because there's a nice little trick you can do for studying the objectives. There's also KB references to VMware docs, and I'll show you that too as well. Go ahead on to the next slide, where we'll cover a little bit more on VMware docs. There we go. So VMware docs has all the documentation for VMware products. It is a wealth of knowledge. I have this bookmarked, and I use it quite a bit when I'm trying to look up, some component of vSphere or vCenter that I'm trying to automate. I want to know how it works and what kind of caveats I can run into. I use VMware docs all the time. So one of the caveats with VMware docs, though, is it's really hard to navigate through. You kind of have to click through the weeds to get to whatever you're looking for. In that case, one of the things I do is I'll just Google for what I'm looking for and type in VMware docs in my Google search, and then usually it's the first hit. So that's kind of a trick that I do. And there's a link to VMware docs at the bottom. It's just docs.vmware.com. So go on to the next slide.
All right. Ready for your VMware Labs demo?
Yep.
I need to make you a presenter here really quick. And make presenter. All right.
All right, can you see it?
Yes. Yep, good to go.
Okay. So this is the site that you can go to get to the exam blueprints for the VCP DCV. Let me go ahead and link that in the chat for you guys, just so you have it and you can follow along. There we go. So basically this gives you the exam guide that you can download, and this includes the blueprint, which is the picture that you saw on the slide, has the exam details and stuff, but at the bottom here is the objective list. Now this is your bread and butter on what to study for the exam. So what I recommend and what I've done for studying for certifications, I do this on Microsoft exams as well, is get the objective list. I go through here, anything that I'm completely comfortable with, like HA solutions for vSphere, I'll cross off. I'll keep going down the list. If there's something I really don't know that much yet, I leave it, and then I just go through the list, and then once I'm done, I go back through anything that I didn't cross off. I study it. I study the crap out of it until I'm comfortable enough to cross it off, and then I work my way down the list, and then once everything's crossed off, I'm ready for the exam. So that's worked out well for me in the past, and that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah, that's a really good method. Because it's helpful going through the exam blueprint like that. And a good buddy of mine, Michael Bender, he was a IT trainer for many, many years. He always mentioned to me what he did is very similar, in that he goes through the whole list, and any objective that he knows without question, he highlights green. Anything that he kind of sort of knows, he highlights yellow, and anything he knows nothing about highlights red. And a lot of people mention, I bring that up because a lot of people mention time as one of the big barriers to certification. And that kind of helps you prioritize, okay, maybe I can let the yellows go a little bit. I can answer some, maybe most questions that have to do with those exam objectives, but the reds are what I really need to focus on, right? So, definitely whichever route or whichever method you want to use, depending if you want to be really granular about it or if you just want to, say, hey, I know this or I don't, however, people study differently, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep, be efficient with your time and what you need to learn, for sure. At the bottom here, there's KB articles on the different technologies of vSphere, vCenter. So you click on those, you'll get these 50-page guides. So that gives you extra information on that. Let me go ahead and we're gonna go through the demo, or not the demo, the hands-on lab. So for those of you that don't have access to any home lab equipment or don't have licenses for specific VMware software, you can go to VMware's hands-on labs and you can tinker around and learn that technology. It's really, really useful. Even if you have hardware at home, I highly recommend the labs. To get to it, all you do is just Google VMware Labs. It's the first hit on Google. And that brings you to this page. This contains all the labs. And if you scroll down, you can see all the various applications and software that VMware provides. And even if you scroll all the way down, you see that they have VMware Cloud on AWS, which is pretty cool. I'll have to check that out later. But yeah, there's a lot of cool hands-on labs that you can do and get some experience with all the different technologies without having to, set up your own home lab or find a way to get licenses. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through the virtualization. Oh, go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I was going to say, one other thing that you mentioned to me the other day, Luke, is that, you look at a lot of their competitors' hands-on labs, and they're very rigid, right? And that, okay, we're going to do step 1, step 2, step 3. With VMware's labs, it's been a bit for me, but correct me if I'm wrong. It's very log you into the environment and let you tinker with things, correct?
Oh yeah, yep, and I'll show that right here in a sec. But yeah, it's like a sandbox. It's really nice.
Nice.
So, yep, we'll go ahead and click on the virtualization 101, and it will start deploying my lab after I put in my VMware account. If you don't have a VMware account, you need to make one because that's where you download all the different evaluations. I think you need one to do the certification test, don't you, Andy?
Yeah, you do have to have a MyLearn account, yes.
Yep. All right, so now it's going to go ahead and deploy my lab environment. And then on the right here is like a lab manual. It's kind of like a handbook. It explains all the different components in detail. There's 526 pages. So like, what is virtualization? You can read through this whole thing. And then if you go back to the first page, the lab guidance gives you the hands-on lab portions. And for this particular lab, it's broken down into 3 modules. They're 60-minute modules. But I'm going to go ahead and show you the simulation for ESX installation. This is really slick. So if you go ahead and click here, basically we can get a simulated ESX installation. So for those of you that don't have the hardware to practice on, you can practice installing ESX through this simulation. And I'm an automation engineer for ESX, so I've installed ESX over 1,000 times in my IT career, and this is very, very accurate, I can tell you that. So you can go through and it looks exactly like you're installing ESX. It's really slick, all the steps. So really useful if you haven't had a chance to play around with installing ESX yet.
Hey Luke, one question that's coming up right now. You know, are these labs repeatable once you've gone through them? I mean, to my knowledge, you can run them as many times as you want, right?
Yep. I loaded this lab up like 10 times yesterday, going through just getting familiar with it and everything. So yeah, you can repeat them. And then inside your VDI session, you have access to vCenter. You can play around with it, log in. Yeah, you can do this as many times, and it's free. So I highly recommend you take advantage of the hands-on labs, especially for the more expensive technologies like vSAN. It's going to be really hard for you to set that up at home. So just do the lab and play around with it there.
Nice.
All right. So then how do I give you present?
I can grab it back here.
Okay.
Make myself presenter. Make presenter. And show screen. Should be able to see my screen again.
Yep, I can see it.
All right. So, next slide for you.
So Altero's VMware Dojo is a really good resource for content on VMware for studying. I've been blogging for Altero for it'll be about 5 years in January. So there's tons of content. There's a lot of expert authors that have been working with VMware for their entire careers that post all kinds of different stuff, gotchas, how to deal with this situation. So it's a really good resource to check out. We also have webinars like this one, videos and ebooks. So, and also if you have a question on a particular blog post that you're reading, you just scroll down to the bottom, ask your question, and the author will get back to you. So really, really cool resource.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll mention really quick, there's a topic that you think is really interesting and want to see us cover. Just let us know in the questions form, or you can always hit Luke or I up on Twitter, and we'll be sure to get someone working on that topic.
Yep. So other learning methods. There's always training books, classroom training. I don't know how much you'll want to do after having to do that first required training class. Hands-on experience. This is a big one. If you don't currently work with VMware, like you're in the service desk role and you want to get certified and start learning VMware so you can get that next job using VMware, there's a few ways that you can get experience. You can do freelance work. There's a bunch of websites where you can post freelance services. You can do even like free work for nonprofits. They're always hurting for some IT services. I know me and Andy get hit up once in a while for different jobs, so you can kind of cut your teeth there, getting that VMware experience. Also, teach what you know. That's the best way for you to sharpen your skills and really learn something. Maybe make your own blogging website. Start making your own blog post on things you've learned. I mean, you don't have to be an expert to make blog posts. Share it with the community. There's always somebody that's at the same level as you or just starting out that will get benefit from the way that you've experienced something. So blog posts are awesome. Also, GitHub. So you might think, oh, I'm not a developer, I'm an infrastructure guy. Why would I make a project on GitHub? Well, GitHub is not just for developers anymore. Actually, Microsoft's documentation is all on GitHub. So what I recommend, start a GitHub project, put some documentation on, if you figured out how to set something up a certain way, make a markdown file, document it on there. If you have some cool Power CLI scripts that you've been writing, put those on there. Any sort of like Terraform infrastructure templates that you've created, share them with the community. having blog posts and a GitHub project is far more powerful in a resume than having like a college degree, in my opinion. So I've interviewed my fair share of people for positions, and I've never seen anybody walk up with, you know, a GitHub profile, blog post. That would blow me away if somebody did that. Let me see. VMware Learning Zone. Andy, do you want to speak to that one a little bit more?
I can, yeah, I can speak to the VMworld one as well. So, I mean, these are two other options that came up. They're both paid. VMware Learning Zone is like $1,000. It's not cheap, but the big thing there is they actually provide a bunch of what I want to say, not test exams, but like practice exams. That's the word I'm looking for. So, you know, some people learn best by actually running through practice exams. That's tough to say. So, and then additionally, VMworld, you know, if you can make it to the VMworld conference, there's a lot of great content there, you know, not only on what's new, but, you know, on how to use best practices, and all that knowledge is going to be applicable to the VCP certification. So
one more I want to add, another awesome learning resource is Twitter. I know for years Andy was telling me, oh, you got to get on Twitter, you got to get on Twitter, and I'm against all social media. I don't use Facebook or anything, and I was like, no, it's social media. It's not. It's an awesome learning tool. I follow all kinds of people on Twitter, and then you can follow VMware. They post all the recent news. I go to work and I find that I know stuff before everybody else just because I see it on Twitter. So it's really cool, really good resource right there.
Nice. One question that came up here: VMware Learning Zone costs $1,000. Is that for a lifetime membership or yearly? I don't know for sure, Ryan, but they had it worded as subscription in the checkout box. So I would assume annual subscription. So don't quote me on that, but that's my guess. With that, we got about another 8, 9, 10 minutes here. We're gonna go through some strategies for lab setup, and then we'll do wrap up. So, you know, the best way to learn, obviously, is to get hands-on the technology, right? And the first thing you got to do is get the media, and it's complicated. Well, it's complicated if you want to do more than just one test run. So you can download most VMware media, install the software, and run it for 60 days. You know, that includes things like ESXi, vCenter, that type of thing. And after that 60 days, you know, it expires and you can reinstall it. Where the complication comes in, and I've run into this myself before, is let's say, okay, you know, I've tested it, I'm done with it for a while. Now a year goes by, 2 years goes by. I want to do the same thing again, but with like a new version. Being my VMware account has already been associated with an evaluation, it becomes really difficult to grab that media again. So, I mean, yeah, you can just set up another account and do all that stuff, but it's kind of a pain in the rear end. So that's where some of the complication comes from. So yeah, again, you can go grab that media anytime, especially if you're doing this for the first time. VMware.com/try-vmware.html down there at the bottom. Let's talk about home labs. So, you know, we've done quite a bit of material on the Altera VMware blog about home labs. You know, these are just some tips here. And again, you want to get your hands on the technology and use it. And just some basic tips here before we show some options is you want to shoot for 3 nodes if you can. That way, you know, you can use all the bells and whistles that are included inside of vSphere. 3 nodes is like the magic number there. You want to spec for and set up vSAN, which is VMware's hyper-converged offering, in that it uses the in-chassis hard disks of each node and creates a storage system between all nodes in the cluster. There's going to be information and materials on that in the exam, so you definitely want to set it up and use it, at least test it. So that's why I always recommend that. You want to have a layer 3 switch in the environment if you can. It's not always feasible because they're expensive. At the minimum, you want to have at least something with a web management tool. That way you can set up VLANs and things like that. That'll, again, allows you to do some more detailed testing on the network side of things in your vSphere home lab. And then officially supported hardware, things in the VMware compatibility matrix. You don't have to adhere to that list for a home lab, but you need to make sure that ESXi can at least run on the hardware that you're looking at. So let's look at some hardware options here. So on the compute side, Dell R620, it's a little dated, and the HP equivalents, they're a little dated, but they work for the current versions of vSphere. The other thing, the reason why I listed Dell and HP is because, those are the ones I'm most familiar with myself. Supermicro has some options. And some of the other vendors, I've found that their servers of that equivalent range are really super loud, which is not great for a home setting. But something to take into account. You've got Intel NUCs. I love Intel NUCs for lab setups, especially if you need the lab to be mobile. So definitely take a look at Intel NUCs, or you can do a nested configuration, being nested vSphere running on vSphere or a different platform, and I'll get to that in the next slide. Basically, you're virtualizing vSphere, you're virtualizing ESXi on top of ESXi. So that could be nice in training scenarios when you have one physical host with a lot of resources, right? For storage, we've got things like you could do a Supermicro box filled with disks and run something like FreeNAS on it. I'm a big fan of ReadyNASs myself. I really like the Netgear ReadyNAS line, or there's lots of equivalents. I know Synology, QNAP, there's take your pick. But personally, I like ReadyNAS. vSAN I mentioned, so you could spec out all of your compute hosts with lots of disks in them and use vSAN across the cluster. Networking, we got simple flat network, using what you already have at home. Or I would recommend picking up a TP-Link or a Netgear ProSafe, something like I said with at least layer 2 basic web management. Or there are nested options in GNS3. Go take a look at GNS3 if you're interested in kind of creating your own virtual switch. It's kind of, just do a Google search for GNS3, you'll find it. It's free to download and use, and you can kind of create like a network switch virtual machine on top of vSphere. It's really cool. If you're interested in more details on any of these categories, we have a blog post on each of them at the bottom of each column there. From there, I wanted to kind of finish up with some nested options here. Again, nesting, creating an ESXi virtual machine on top of something. You can do that with VMware Player or VMware Workstation. I was actually going to demo that today, but I ran into some issues actually running VMware Workstation and VMware Player on my machine. If you're running Windows 10 and you have Windows Device Guard or Credential Guard enabled, it is not compatible until you disable those features. And in order to disable those features, they're UEFI integrated. And if you have BitLocker enabled, if you make even the slightest mistake in disabling those or deleting the applicable register keys, you can make your machine go into BitLocker recovery mode, which I didn't want to mess around with that the day or two before a webinar. So I didn't go forward with that. But those are options. VMware Player is free for non-commercial use. VMware Workstation is like the pro version of VMware Player that you can install on your workstation. Last I knew it was $250 for that. Or you can nest ESXi on top of ESXi. So if you have a piece of hardware, a server or something that you can install ESXi on, you can install multiple virtual instances of ESXi on top of it. Or there is the ability to run ESXi version 6.0 on top of Hyper-V, which comes with Windows 10. But there's some issues with the newer versions of ESXi in doing that. And I don't know if that's going to be something that's possible moving forward, but I at least wanted to mention it as something you could look out for. From there, we're running low on time here, so I just wanted to mention two other things, some tips for exam day. From my perspective, I always get lots of sleep before exam day. I always eat a good solid breakfast. I always tend to have the same thing. I always have oatmeal with granola and bananas and peanut butter on exam day for some reason. I make a routine out of it, right, is my point. Try to do the same thing every day before the exam. Make sure you're comfortable with it. Go sit. Don't rush. Get there with plenty of time. Luke, I don't know if you have any tips on your side.
I would pick a time frame, whatever works best for you. If you're a morning person like me, schedule your exam in the morning. If you work better in the afternoon, schedule it in the afternoon. Also, what I like to do, I like to get up in the morning and do kind of like a review of everything, a quick once over, and then I go and take the exam. So that's kind of how I do it.
Sounds good. And then the other thing I wanted to do before we sign off with our content, we've got some wrap up stuff to do after this, but just want to mention, be a lifelong learner. I mean, IT is an industry that is constantly changing. You got to embrace that change. And I have to quote one of my industry, heroes, is Jeffrey Snover, the creator of PowerShell and one of the chief architects of Windows Server. I've got to quote him. I remember watching a talk of his one time where he said, if you don't like change, you should go become a lumberjack, because that industry is widely the same as it's been for the last 80 years, right? So I always think about that when I'm thinking about being a lifelong learner. Any closing thoughts on that, Luke?
Yeah, no, I mean, it has to become kind of your lifestyle. Setting aside time to, ramp up on technology. That's part of the game now. Things are moving so fast that's part of the job.
Definitely. All right, well, that wraps it up for our content. Let's go into our wrap up and Q&A section here. I know we're at time, so I'm going to kind of scoot right through these last couple of sections, but we got some great information in these last few sections here, and I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So we're going to do some Q&A after this stuff as well. We'll probably go for another 5, 6, 7 minutes, but stick around if you want to be part of the Q&A as well. So one thing I want to mention is we do have our latest VMware ebook is specifically on Power CLI, the Aspiring Automator's Guide. So basically how to get started, scripting logic, script building HTML reports, lots of different things that you can do with Power CLI. If you're interested in that ebook, you can go download it, the URL right there at the top of the screen. And I wanted to mention the VCP certification course, the exam giveaway, the $4,500 giveaway that we're doing as part of this webinar. So again, we are going to be announcing that on our website, and you'll be notified by email as well. And we're going to be doing that drawing tomorrow, November 21st, and we're going to make it very transparent. So, basically I'm going to put everyone who attended in an Excel document, and each row is a number, right? And then I'm just going to use the good old get random command in PowerShell, and we're going to let the PowerShell gods pick the winner. And I'll record that process, graying out everyone's names and everything. We won't give out any personal identifying information, but we just want to be as transparent as process. That way everybody knows how the winner was selected. So be on the lookout for that tomorrow. Quick word about Altero VM Backup. Again, we're a backup company, and I'll talk about this really quick while Luke has a second to look through the remaining questions and address any of those here shortly if he wants to. So again, we're a backup company. We focus on providing efficient backup, full control of your backups, and we pair that with praise-winning 24/7 lightning fast support. Some of our latest developments for our Altero VM backup product, we've got continuous data protection with 5-minute RTOs, WAN optimized replication and DR, and support for Amazon S3 and Wasabi cloud storage. If you're interested in more information about that product, you can go to altero.com/VM-backup for more information. We also have a Office 365 backup product now as well. So that Office 365 backup product can be managed from a single web UI, just like our other backup products. And it allows you to protect your Office 365 data from accidental deletion, malicious users, basically the full gamut of threats out there to data, right? And kind of the same thing, we can do simple with this product, we can do simple annual billing. And we also provide the storage for you to use for the solution as well. It's Azure-based storage. We manage it. We take care of it. That way you don't have to worry about spinning up storage for your backups. If you're interested in a little bit more information on that, go to altero.com/office-365-backup for more information. And if you're an MSP, we do have a MSP program for both of these products. Basically, you get the full feature set, all the bells and whistles of both products. You can manage and monitor the backups for all your customers from a single pane of glass. You got a pay-per-month model with no contracts, and again, access to that 24/7 lightning fast support. For more information on that, go to altero.com/MSP for more information. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip over the demo for now because we're over time, but I want to run one last poll here. And what certification tracks are you most interested in? I'm pretty sure I know how this is going to turn out. I'm guessing It's going to be DCV. What are your predictions, Luke?
Yeah, I think DCV, that resonates with the most people.
Yep, definitely.
Sure.
Yep. I
Yeah,
could
it's
see.
just oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I could see some people picking cloud just because of the popularity of cloud, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, definitely DCV. And I'm looking at the
Yeah.
responses come in, and you know, without a doubt, DCV is the most popular. So we've got about just under half of the webinar has voted in the poll, and we're at 77, 75% DCV. So definitely there's a lot of interest there. But we've got 12, 13% interested in network virtualization and CMA. So very interesting, very cool. We'll leave that a couple more seconds here, and then we'll do some questions, and we'll sign off for the day. So I'm going to close that poll, and I can share the responses really quick. So again, 70% DCV, 13% NV, 13% CMA, 4% on the VDI side, so, and 1% digital workspace. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, appreciate you all sharing that with us. And with that, let's move on to our Q&A. So again, if you have any follow-up questions here, be sure to use that questions form. For the sake of time, I don't know if we're going to be able to get through all the questions that have been asked. So we'll be sure to do some sort of follow-up blog post and send out an email when that's done. So that way, if you did ask a question and you didn't get an answer, we'll be sure to get an answer to that way if need be. So I don't know, Luke, is there any question that really stood out to you that you want to address?
Yeah, I saw one. Does Virtualization 101 lab cover every aspect of VCP? I would say no. The labs are their own entity, and they're not designed for, covering one specific exam. What I would suggest is you use the objectives for the VCP exam, and just use the labs to study those different objectives. So.
Yep, good deal, good deal. I have a question here. Can we have a Altera webinar on NSX? I think that's a great idea. I mean, I don't know NSX really well myself, but we could definitely find somebody who does. I know a guy actually, so that's great feedback there. Let's see. We have a number of different ones here about how much does it cost to get another VCP certification after the first. It's going to depend on whatever, however expensive the exams are at that time. There is an exam requirement, but the good news, like I mentioned earlier, the silver lining is after you've taken that $4,250 course for the first time and you've passed your VCP, you don't have to take that course again afterwards. So it becomes significantly cheaper to certify in a new version of vSphere than it does for your first time. Let's see what else we've got here. If there are any questions that you see that you want to address on top of that, Luke, just let me know. I'm looking through the list for my next one. I did have one here about the VTSP, which is VMware Technical Sales Professional. That's more of a sales-oriented certification. The ones that we've been talking about today fall more into the IT professional space. Another question I saw centered around if I want to learn about VMware hyperconverged technologies, what certification would I focus on? And I would say that is the DCV track. Basically, that's everything to do with vSAN, which is included in DCV. What exactly does the training voucher do for the giveaway? So the training voucher will get you access to that $4,250 install config manage course, and will also cover the exam costs as well. So all you have to do is, if you win, all you have to do is go sit for the course, take the exams as well, pass them, and you are VCP certified. Let's see, a lot of good questions, folks. Keep them coming. Like I said, if we don't get to all these, we will make sure to do a follow-up blog post to make sure we get these covered.
Someone's asking how many vouchers are we giving away?
We're just giving away the one. Just one. You could be the one lucky winner. One lucky winner. Can you send the link for the CCNA version of getting the VCP? I don't have that handy, but I will do some digging and find it and include it in that follow-up blog post. Well, with that, Luke, we're 10 minutes over. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. Again, if there were any questions that did not get answered, again, we'll include those in a follow-up blog post. Additionally, we will, be posting the winner for the giveaway tomorrow, including a video with that. So be on the lookout for that. With that, I will let everyone go. Luke, I want to say thanks to you as well for taking the time to come talk to us today and share your experiences. It's always kind of an interesting world certification, right? So we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
So, and with that, so I'll leave you with just a couple of closing resources here on the screen. Thank you for attending, and we hope to see you again for another Altera webinar sometime in the future. Have a good one.